Welcome back. My name is Colby Brown, and I am here with B&H for this amazing landscape-focused video series. Now, in our first video, we talked about the core concepts of what is landscape photography and all about it, so be sure to check it out if you haven't already. But right now, we're actually going to talk about gear. Now, if you guys are watching this with B&H, you are probably a gearhead just like I am, so you love talking about this stuff. We have a lot of things to cover today, talking about cameras, lenses, filters, tripods, and some other accessories that I really love when it comes to landscape photography. So starting things off, let's talk about cameras. So for me, I am a Sony artisan, which means that all the gear that I'm talking about today is going to be focused on Sony. But regardless of what camera manufacturer you prefer to use, you're going to find many of the same lenses and camera type setups with your own gear selection. So just keep that in mind. So starting things off, for me, my main go-to camera right now for pretty much everything, not just landscape photography, is the Sony A1. Now, this is Sony's latest flagship camera. It's a 50 megapixel sensor, which has amazing dynamic range, around 15 stops of light, and it's really great to use in a lot of landscape-focused scenes as well as other stuff out there. Now, if you want to get into landscape photography and you want something that's a little bit more budget friendly, something that's a little bit more portable, a little bit smaller, I also have something that I love using out there in the field, which is the Sony A7C. Now, this is a smaller form factor. This is actually kind of almost like the body in Sony's smaller A6000 line of cameras, but it's actually a full frame sensor that's fit inside here. So you don't get the full viewfinder at the very top of the camera. It's kind of put off to the side, but you still get a 24 megapixel image sensor. You get a beautiful flip out screen, which allows you to shoot at different perspectives when it comes to landscape photography. And like I said, it's very small and portable. So if I'm going on a situation where I'm photographing landscape images and I want to make sure that I'm working with a light gear bag, oftentimes I'll reach for something like this, the A7C, to take with me out there in the field. It's going to save me a couple pounds in weight, depending on what my other gear setup might be, but it's a great option out there for those that are just getting into landscape photography that want something a little bit lighter to take into the field. So when it comes to landscape photography and lens choices, a lot of photographers tend to go pretty wide. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, although using a wide variety of different lenses that allow you to zoom in a little bit more will offer up a bit more opportunities to photograph different things out there in the field. Regardless of that, let's talk about the holy trinity of most camera lens lineups out there. Starting off here, this is the 16-35 f2.8 G Master lens. It's incredibly sharp. It's a great lens to use when you want to include a lot of your scene of what's inside it. Now, the second lens in the holy trinity out there is going to be the 24-70. Now, this lens is also a G Master lens at f2.8 from Sony, and it is found in my gear bag in most situations out there. Now, the reason for that is that sometimes the 16-35 is a bit too wide for me, and I want to zoom in on my subject a little bit more to isolate it out. The 24-70 is kind of the jack of all trades, the master of none, because it fits in that right middle ground of millimeter zoom range, allowing you to isolate, but also still offer up a little bit of a wide opportunity out there. So completing the holy trinity of lenses is going to be the 70-200. Now, this, like the others, is the f2.8 G Master version, although there are f4 versions out there from Sony and other manufacturers. 70-200 is an interesting lens to choose in the gear bag for landscape photography because most photographies tend to overlook it. Now, the reality is that sometimes the 16-35 is too wide and the 24-70 is going to not give you enough reach. The 70-200 is going to be a great opportunity or great option for you in order to really zoom in and create more intimate images when it comes to nature and landscape. Now, out here at Dingman Falls, a lens like this could allow me to isolate water dropping onto a specific rock at the bottom of a waterfall to really isolate that moment and kind of remove the rest of the distractions that are out there. Either way, 70-200 is a great lens to use, especially if you're feeling a bit bored with some of the other lenses you have in your gear lineup when it comes to landscape photography. So if you want a more budget-friendly option when it comes to that 24-70 millimeter range, one of the best alternatives that I've found, especially with the Sony system, is the 24-105 f4 G series lens. Now, this lens is great for those photographers out there that don't really need the faster aperture-based lenses such as the f2.8 G Master series because it's still sharp, offers great options out there in order to still create some unique images while offering a more lightweight and portable option out there for those to carry out there in the field. Now, if you're like me and sometimes find that the 16-35 doesn't offer wide enough opportunities for you, you want to pick up something like this, which is an ultra-wide angle zoom lens, which is the 12-24 f2.8 G Master lens. There's an f4 version that is a bit smaller and lighter and more portable for you guys out there, but regardless, this lens or this millimeter length gives you unique opportunities to really go ultra-wide in the 12 millimeter to 14 millimeter range, get really close to your subjects, filling a lot more of your frame with them, and create more interesting images when it comes to depth and perspective. Now, so far I have mostly talked about zoom lenses when it comes to landscape photography because they're a bit more adaptable to different situations out there. But there are times where we want to experiment with more prime lenses, especially when you need a bit more light into your frame. Now, out here, we're not going to be doing any astro or night photography, but if you are, something like the 24mm f1.4 G Master lens is a great option when it comes to something that's lightweight, portable, incredibly sharp, and also incredibly fast with that 1.4 aperture. Because what it allows you to do is allow you to get a lot more light into your sensor, giving you more options to experiment with shooting at the tail ends of the day or even doing night photography in different scenes out there around the world. Now, one of the most important accessories when it comes to landscape photography happens to be the tripod. Now, if you're photographing during the middle of the day and there's a lot of light, you probably won't find yourself using a tripod, although you probably still should. But regardless, if you are getting into long exposures, you're shooting more at the tail ends of the day for sunrise or sunset, you might find yourself in situations where you want to keep your ISO quite low, which means your shutter speed needs to come up, which means that you need to use a tripod in order to maintain sharp images, even though you're using these long exposures. So when it comes to tripods, there are three core elements that you need to take into account when it comes to picking the right tripod for you. Now, the first is going to be portability, so how lightweight it is, how packable it is, depending on which bag you're putting it into, or if you're traveling, if it's going to go into your carry-on, or if you're going to check it in. Now, the next most important element is going to be sturdiness. So what I mean by that is when you put your camera on here and say there's wind or something else happening, you want to make sure that your tripod is nice and sturdy so that it doesn't tip and fall over, right? Because then your camera is going to fall down, you're going to lose your gear, you're going to damage things, and no one wants to deal with that. And the third one that it comes down to is going to be budget, what price it costs. Depending on the type of tripod you need, depending on how sturdy it needs to be, depending on how portable you want it to be, is going to offer different varieties and different price points depending on what your needs are. So with the different tripods that are out there, there are two different kinds of tripods that you want to take into account when it comes to, again, picking the right one that's for you. Now, the first one, the one that I prefer, are going to be twist lock tripods. Now, what this means is that as you turn and you twist the locking mechanisms inside the legs to expand them out, it's going to lock them in place. Now, the other alternative is going to be snap lock tripods, which essentially allows you to snap them in place as you extend the legs. Now, both those and twist locks offer different opportunities for you to choose different types of tripods out there, but me personally, I prefer the twist lock simply because they are easier to clean. As you twist them off in the reverse direction, you can easily take the legs apart, clean any dirt or grime that's been in there, and then put them back together, allowing your tripod to last a lot longer in the process. You can do some of that with snap lock tripods, but it's much more of an involved process. And then lastly, we need to talk about the tripod head. Now, there are different types of tripod heads out there, but the one that I prefer for landscape photography is going to be a simple ball head, which simply means that the camera is going to attach to a mechanism on the top of your head, and there's a rotating ball that allows you to articulate the angle that you're going for. These, again, are very easy to clean. They come in a variety of different sizes and different price points, but they are by far the best option when it comes to tripods for landscape photography. Typically what happens when you're photographing landscape images and you go from horizontal to vertical, you typically have to lean your ball head all the way to one side in order to get that vertical angle because it's attached at the bottom of your camera. Now, with an L bracket attached to your tripod, you can quickly go from shooting horizontal to shooting vertical very quickly while maintaining your center of gravity because the ball head is always angled upright, not leaning over in one direction or the other. So when it comes to accessories that I love the most when it comes to landscape photography, it has to come down to filters. Now, there are different kinds of filters and types of filters, and I want to cover both with you guys here right now. So let's go ahead and start off with the different types of filters. Now, here we have in my hand, this is a graduated neutral density filter, which essentially means that it's darker in one half than it is in the other. Now, this is a slide filter, which we're going to cover in a second, but essentially what this allows me to do is darken only portions of my frame in order to account for a brighter exposure, such as, say, a sunset or sunrise, where I have a darker foreground element. Now, next up, we have neutral density filters. These are essentially filters that darken the complete scene of whatever it is that you're looking at. Now these are great when you really want to slow down the shutter speed of your entire composition, of your entire frame. I use these often when I'm photographing with water, rivers, streams, seascapes, waterfalls like we have out here in Digman Falls. Neutral density filters are really great to allow you to slow down your shutter speed even during the day when you have bright sunlight in order to get that more dreamlike look with those longer shutter speeds when it comes to water. Now lastly, we have circular polarizers. Now polarizers are essentially filters that allow you to either cut or enhance reflected light. So they can make the reflections happening within a water source much more enhanced or much more reflective, or they can completely cut them so you can actually see through the water. When it comes to places like we have out here in Digman Falls and shooting waterfalls, they're also great in order to cut that reflected light off of wet surfaces such as the rocks at the bottom of waterfalls. Either way, polarizers are probably the most used filter when it comes to landscape photographers because of the types of contrast that it adds to your scene, as well as its ability to either cut or enhance that reflected light. So now that we've talked about the types of filters, let's talk about the different kinds of filters and how you actually use them out in the field. Now first off, we have screw-on filters such as the polarizer we just talked about that attaches to your setup by screwing onto the front of your lens element. Now these are great in a lot of situations because they're small, they're lightweight, they don't take up a lot of space. The problem comes down to when you want to stack filters. Say you want to put a polarizer on with a screw-on ND filter. Sometimes stacking filters can cause a bit more of an issue when you're using the screw-on filters because these filters can actually attach themselves, especially when you're working in cold environments. No one wants to be out there in a situation where you're photographing a beautiful scene with beautiful light and your filters are actually stuck together and you can't get them off. There's been a few times where that's happened to me, so I try to regulate my use of screw-on filters when it comes to circular polarizers only in order to get the best results. Now next up we have slide-in filters. Now these filters are great because they offer complete coverage for the different types of situations you're going for. And essentially what has to happen is that you have to attach them to the front of your lens using a specific holder for the filters. Now they're great for neutral density filters that we talked about before, as well as graduated neutral densities, making it easier to stack filters in the process for more complicated setups that you might find yourself doing. Now lastly, we have the smallest types of filters, which are essentially filters that fit onto the backside of lenses between the lens itself and your sensor. Now these filters are great to use with lenses such as my 12-24 f2.8 G Master lens because that lens can't handle normal filters because of its large front lens bulbous element. Now these filters are really great for neutral density options because they allow you to slow down that shutter speed with some of these ultra-wide lenses that you couldn't normally put filters on. Now that you have a core understanding of the basics of landscape photography, and we've talked all about camera gear and lenses and accessories that you might need, it's time to take all of that knowledge and put it into practice. And that's what we're doing in the third part of this video series. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a complete workflow process of shooting a scene out here in the field at Digman Falls. I hope you guys really enjoyed the video so far, and we got a lot more coming, so I'll see you guys next time.